Hey, surf enthusiasts. Man, that escalated quickly, no? I mean, we knew it was gonna, but geez Louise, it's like Vegas in my house. We're losing money by the minute, cocktails any hour, it's okay, and no one has any idea what time it is. Vegas, baby, Vegas. So, I hope you survived week 11. Week 12 is gonna be a doozy. I got some stories for you guys. Both style and content is going to be interesting, I think. Hopefully. You got to do it anyway, so, whatever. Um, anyway, hopefully you're not going too stir crazy, and these things are going to be a way to sort of think outside of that little confine of your home, right? I mean, I've resorted to trying weird diets, like, just totally almond based, but that's just nuts. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Um, there's some pretty interesting stories and characters on both sides of the story, those behind the keyboard and those that are making up the content. They'll make great additions to your characters for your character anthologies, so think in those terms as well. Also, this week will be a first chance to experiment at how you might compose a final paper. In other words, I'm going to ask you to find a common shared interest among the selected sources and readings and looks, a collection of info there on the Canvas page. Find some common thread that you find interesting among them. Even if it's just you respond to each one individually and you find sort of an overarching category, right? Like surfing, drugs, and storytelling. Okay, right. What do you find interesting out of each one? You can handle it that way. You might chase down cultural theory through it, right? How does the counterculture keep competing against the culture in each one of those? Okay. And spend a little bit of time with each one, right? Um, what are they? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's take a look at them.
Here's your assignment for this week. Instead of having midweek assignments, you have only one end of week assignment, which is kind of a comprehensive exploration of these things. How does that work? We'll explain in a second. Ultimately, you have to respond to three different groups: a group A subject B, and a subject C, and then tell me what you find interesting in each or how kind of each is related to an overarching topic of your choice. Let's look at each of these items and kind of give you a little bit brief about what it is, and then there'll be more in a lecture which follows. The first is a cartoon from Doonesbury by Gary Trudeau. Gary Trudeau and Doonesbury was a rather long-running American funny series aimed at sort of the literate and elevated political and cultural scene. One of the characters in the series was a surfer dude, right? And kind of looks like Weisbecker in his later years, both versions, really. But, don't judge those without hair, whatever. That's what the first one is. It's not necessarily one of the three groups that you have to respond to, but it does make a nice contrast for the three groups that you do have to respond to because it's an outside version looking in. So, the three groups that you have to respond to are all names that you might recognize except for one. The first is Weisbecker, and his are two excerpts from the book that we chose as book club. The first is details his arrival in Puerto Viejo, and the second details his exploits in his efforts in drug trafficking. Both are PDFs. They might take a second to open. Done with Adobe from here at home, so sorry about that, but they do open. Give them a chance. Read both and then use that as one thing. The second thing, or second group, is a single thing. This is A. B. Stessex the player, about Bunker Spreckles. Interesting character, really interesting character. If you find him interesting enough, there is a longer documentary about him, and I've given you, just for interest rather, the link here to the trailer for the documentary. Also an interesting character for character anthologies, if you're thinking in terms of that. So is he in that matter, right? So is this author as well as his subject. All fair game. That's subject B. Subject C that you have to respond to is Smith and his brand new work, Cocaine and Surfing, 2018, I believe. It includes the introduction from a second author, Matt Warsaw, longtime editor of Surfer magazine. and author of several other things that we encountered at various times during the year. More about that in lecture. But those are your three groups. So you must respond in some collective way to the things that you find interesting in A, the things that you find interesting in B, and the things that you find interesting in C, right? Then you have to make a choice. Either look at Chas Smith co-authored article, Family Values, and it features the Fletcher family, a name that you might recognize from Westwick and Neushul. A number of you commented on him. His name, Herbie Fletcher. This is a look at his son, Christian Fletcher, a longtime radical character in surfing and pro surfing. Brotherhood of the Eternal Love is, I think in lecture I refer to it as Brotherhood of Eternal Sunshine, but it's the same group. It's the drug running and sort of avant-garde surf artistry group. This is interesting. It's a multimedia article. It's archives as well as video, as well as some text put out by Surfline, right? More about that in lecture 2. So you have to come up with a way in which to sort of discuss these things in overarching fashion. How might you do that? You could look at it as culture versus counterculture, right? What's the popular culture of surfing versus the counterculture of surfing? You could look at it as anti-establishment and establishment within the counterculture. If surfing is a counterculture, right, then there's establishment and anti-establishment, right? You're using the theories of Cohen at that point and Hebdige to some degree. You could look at it in terms of, okay, just drugs and surfing, right? That seedy side of surfing. How does that sort of portrayed and cataloged in various ways, which are all sort of explained further in the lecture which follows. But all right, so here's what I found interesting about drugs and surfing in this. Here's what I found about interesting in drugs and surfing in this. And here's what I found interesting about drugs and surfing in this. Not so sure that it tails down into this. Definitely doesn't that. So drugs and surfing kind of makes your choice for you if you did something like that. Or you could do establishment and anti-establishment, right? What's the anti and establishment in this, right? What's the establishment and anti-establishment? What's the anti-establishment and establishment in this? Right, establishment, anti-establishment. You get the idea. But in some way, you've got to choose how to respond to these three groups. And again, here they are. A, B, and C. Plus your choice. This one or este. Okay? Bueno. All right. That's it.
Okay. Now, the best way for me to go about doing this is to give you additional context and a little bit of mini lecture. So you'll forgive me if I kind of check my notes as I sort of give you a little bit of fill-in-the-blank material for who some of these people are and what some of the stories are, right? Okay. First, you've got to read Weisbecker's stuff, right? Both the Porto Viejo piece and the fucking boat. Porto Viejo piece is actually a spot I know well. It's where I concentrated my dissertation and write a lot of the useless articles that no one reads. So, it's an interesting look at a place that not many people know about. It's a Caribbean side, Costa Rican little villa at the very end of the road, though that road is rapidly moving, on one of the last freedman colonies as part of the Spanish slavery movement that still exists. It's a unique mix of both native Bribri people, Caribe people, expats, European travelers, Costa Ricans themselves, Ticos, Nicaraguans, Panamanians, which is close. It's a pretty interesting little spot in the world. So Weisbecker's piece about this is a little bit of wanderlust, right? It's some of that travel wanderlust that we recognize, things that you would see in the Surfer's Journal or in some of the more elaborate documentaries like something that probably Chris Malloy would do, right? Something like that. A little bit more Dan Duane. We read A Year Caught Inside, A Year on the California Surfer's Coast, right? We read a selection from that. A little bit more in that style, London-esque, if you will, right? Bit Hemingway, bit London, right? Really trying to evoke a sense of travel and wanderlust, that element of surfing that we know very well. And then you've got his story of the fucking boat. Some of you remember Wise Becker. He is the guy who had the interesting way of paying for his Dick Brewers. Right, little arrangement there. Here's your bag of dope. There's my Dick Brewer. Pretty awesome little arrangement he had going on. Well, you remember his stories escalated quickly, and they do. This story is one of his first little narratives about his engagement in the drug trade. Check it out. It's part of, both selections are part of the text that some of you had chosen for our book club, which sadly we won't get to do, but I said we get to read selections. Here you go. That's part of In Search of Captain Zero, which is a memoir of Wise Becker as he goes in search of this friend of his. Guy's real name is Christopher, and he lives in Puerto Viejo. Or is last heard from anyway in Puerto Viejo. And Wise Becker drives the coast, and he gets into adventures, and along the way he discusses his surfing and adventures, and reflects back to this time when he and Christopher got into the stuff that they got into. Hence the fucking boat. So as an author, he's a bit outside culture looking in. Right? He's not maybe Dick Brewer himself, but he knows Dick, and he's in the lore. You've read it. He's been captured into the cultural cachet, and has a bit of ethos from which to write and speak that people tend to accredit it, whatever value we attribute to such things. You understand what I'm trying to say? He's got a little bit of shine. He's got a little bit of weight, right? That. Okay? He's got that. But a little bit. The other guy, Stesic. Craig Stesic is a former pro surfer himself, and a very accomplished one. He's also a hell of a writer. He's also been in and out of that countercultural side that would have been anti-establishment, right? He knows that pretty well. If you're going to value or weight cachet and power, right, Stesic's name probably pours more weight than Wise Becker. If for no other reason than Wise Becker was also a bit of an asshole. You'll see if you read more of him at some point in your future. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, Stesic, his story is about Bunker Spreckles, and Bunker Spreckles is like Joe Exotic, perhaps, of surfing. If you're watching the Tiger King, first of all, you should. I mean, holy hell, it's like I keep thinking this can't possibly get any crazier, and then it gets crazier, and I'm like, all right, that has to be it. Then the show's like, yeah, here, hold my beer. I'm like, what? Oh man. All right, so that's Bunker Spreckles' life. It's like that. It's out there, man. It's something that truly you would think you would only write about, but it actually happened. So check out Stesic's piece on him. Where do you look at as Stesic as a writer? That inside-outside view I already mentioned. It's also a good example at how a piece of cultural lore evaluates itself, right? Wise Becker is writing under his own publishing contract, right? He's writing for a publishing house. It's not a surfing related one. It's a sold book that's surfing content, right? So that's somewhat different, right? He's of the culture, but the media source is not. In this case, both are, right? Stesic, both are. You're talking about the Surfer's Journal, one of the still running and long running paper sources, and sort of the cultivated elitist establishment of surfing media. How do they handle it, right? Very artsy, a little bit avant-garde, some excellent photo work as well, and we should consider images. In fact, next week you will at length, but worth the engagement in that sense. Kind of where he falls and how does he reflect on drugs and surfing. The next person that you have is Smith, right? Smith, Cocaine and Surfing. Gee, I wonder what that's going to be about. Okay, so Cocaine and Surfing is sort of a modern day take on current countercultural and upper countercultural, the establishment position, right? So pro surfing, not pro surfing. How do they? Where are they? How does this look? What does this look like? His style, excuse me, his style is probably what you would consider to be like punk rock, right? He's a bit aggressive. He favors the hard, crisp sentence, the outlandish detail, the sort of quick, fast-paced, moving, driving style. Not the melodic, sort of elegaic, reverent tones of maybe Stesic, but rather something that you might read in another, maybe more podcast material almost. He has his own website. It's called Beach Grit. He also does a lot of work for Stab, which is another cultural and industry. Sorry, I'm getting attacked by this little bee. Damn it. He's got another, Stab is another cultural and sort of irreverent media source, right? They write the hard article that nobody wants to talk about. They poke fun. They poke the bear, so to speak. They'll take your idols and they'll tear them down. If they're going to do something, if surfing's going to do something racy, you'd find it in Stab magazine. They'll also do the things that not a lot of people else want to say for fear of hurting contractual obligation or profit line, right? They'll say some shit. So they employ Chaz Smith. So you've got Smith writing about current pro surfing and the cocaine use. I've included the introduction with it. You should read it. One, because it gives you background of Smith, but two, it's also an established character for Character Anthology and voice. Matt Warsaw is a voice and name you should probably begin to recognize. We've used his pieces and things here and there over time. Longtime editor of Surfer Magazine. Once gave yours truly a break to write a movie review that appeared in Surfer Magazine. Whoa. That was kind of... anyway, interesting guy. His intro is worth why you should pay attention to Chaz, right? So what do you think about Chaz Smith's take on drugs and surfing? What's interesting there? Then you've got two things there that are of choice. You've got family values and the Brotherhood of Eternal Sunshine, right? The one is the multimedia, a mixed look from Surfline, a cultural source, clearly, which is a pretty big, these days, form of the media. It's both meteorological forecasting, travel guide, as well as cultural library, right? Like an inertia site. It's got articles and movies and reviews, and it's a pretty big player, I would think. So you've got their coverage of the Brotherhood of the Eternal Sunshine, right? And then you've got the other one is Family Values from Chaz Smith is one of the co-authors. I forget the other off the top of my head anyway. It's about the Fletchers. Two other names you should know. Herbie Fletcher, right, from Nestwick and Neuschel. His son, Christian, is kind of the focus of the article, and Christian's own son. They've always been a sort of anti-establishment subculture in the counterculture of however many layers you want to make this. He represents that sort of punk rock movement away from the sort of clean cut movement, right? However you want to make that divide, whatever you want to call it. So that'd be a good example and a look at that written from a guy who's, what you know about Chaz. So that's it. Those are your contexts and fill in the blanks. You know what to do with them. We looked at those. That's about it. I hope in these virtual times you're keeping yourself calm. I find that being stuck on the computer so long, hitting F5 is refreshing. Yeah, you're welcome for that one. Okay. Please reach out and email if you have any questions, and we'll be in touch.